How would you like to develop a perfect golf grip, which creates a synergy of leverage for club head speed and power, but also stability for control and accuracy? Hi, my name is Eric Kaplan. I've had the privilege and pleasure of coaching multiple major champions, and I want to show you the perfect way to put your hands on a golf club. When we talk about the perfect golf grip, we are really referring to three things. First and foremost is grip strength. In other words, how many knuckles should you see of your lead hand? The second thing is placement of the club in your hand. Should you hold the club down here in the fingers? Should you hold in the palms? What's optimal? The third thing we're going to talk about is grip pressure. In other words, how tightly or soft should you hold a golf club? So when it comes to grip strength, how many knuckles should you see of your lead hand? I was hosting a certification down in Miami for a really prominent golf instructor. When we brought up the question, how strong should your grip be? How many knuckles should you see? When this one prominent instructor stood up and said, you want to see 2.5 knuckles of your lead hand. I said, okay. First of all, why? Secondly, in your book, you also said that you want to hold the golf club based on the way your arms are hanging. He said, that's also correct. I said, well, these are two kind of contradictory statements. He looked at me a little confused and I said, okay, let me give you a situation. Let's say you had a golfer who's a little bit older and a little bit of a poor posture situation going on. And by poor posture, I mean a little bit more rounding of the spine. He's like, well, what are you talking about? I said, here's the issue. For as long as you're saying to somebody you should grip the club the way your arms hang, the way your arms hang is based upon your posture. So if I had a student who had a lot of rounding of his spine, this is the way his arms would hang. At which point you would see 4 knuckles. And for him to grip the golf club in a more natural fashion, you would see a very strong grip. So I said, the first thing you do to this golfer is say, that's a bad grip, and get him in a more neutral position. This instructor said, yes. I said, that's the worst thing you could do for him. He looked at me kind of confused, saying, what are you talking about? I said, okay. Let's imagine this golfer has a lot of rounding of his spine, shoulders are out of its socket. His tendency is going to be lifting on the way through. And if he lifts on the way through with a neutral grip, he's going to miss it right off the planet. He's not going to be able to play golf for 3 weeks until he learns how to manipulate his hands on the way down. Not beneficial. So he looked at me and said, well, what would you do? I said, well, I'd start off by changing his posture. He looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you got a student to more neutral position with his spine by proper hinging, and you create a little bit of what's called shoulder engagement to connect into more powerful muscles of the body, what just happened to the grip? Whereby if your shoulders are rounded out of their socket, you're going to see a very strong grip, which would be a proper matchup based on this posture. If I create a little bit more shoulder engagement, I just neutralize the grip. That would be a proper way to make a grip change. Because for as long as you're saying to somebody, hey, let me change your grip without appreciating the grip is based upon your posture, I'm putting the carriage before the horse. And I'm offering literally this much opportunity for the long-term progress that as a student you deserve. So this instructor got a little bit crass and he said, Eric, you mean to tell me the next thing you're going to say is, I don't want to see the V of my trail hand point to my shoulder. And I said, well, the position of the trail hand is also based upon your posture. He looked at me, he's like, what are you talking about? I said, okay, if you're only focusing on the position of the trail hand, this is what a student's going to do. They're going to get here and they're going to throw the right hand on the club and say, where is that V pointing now? He said, well, what's the issue with that? I said, well, if you have a student that's just throwing their right hand on top of the club, what just happened to their trail shoulder? He said, it kind of came out of its socket. I said, now where are the shoulders pointing? They're open, they're well left. This creates condition by which you would come over the top and slice the ball off the planet in your downswing. The instructor got very quiet very quickly. I said, yes, in fact, the position of the trail hand is based upon your posture. The way that you bring your trail hand to the club is by incorporating a little bit what's called secondary tilt of the spine. And that's a little bit of a bump of the hip forward that will drop the trail shoulder down. This is what allows you to get your trail hand to the club in a position where both the V's of your lead hand and trail hand are parallel to each other and also match up to your trail shoulder. And so at this point, this instructor got up and just left the room. And my point in the conversation was not to offend him or say that he was wrong, but rather present a series of conversations by which these instructors know how to better instruct their students, by which you can find a little bit more improvement for them. Because for as long as you're only focusing on changing somebody's grip without first focusing on posture, you're putting the carriage before the horse. And you're offering this much opportunity for the long-term progress that student deserves. And so the big takeaway here before we delve into the next piece, which is club placement in between the palms of the hand, is just know that there's a matchup between your posture as well as your grip. So the second thing we're going to talk about is placement of the club in your hand. So by that, I mean, do we want to hold the club down here in the fingers? Do we want to hold the club in the palms? What's optimal? What's ideal? Now, in playing golf, there are two basic grips you can utilize. One more for leverage and power, the other more for control and consistency. And for as long as you're making a putting stroke, for instance, I would certainly want to hold the club kind of more in between the palms of my hand, creates a little bit more stability. However, if you hold the club in this position in your full swing, you're going to create the conditions by which you can't even set the club and create any bit of power. Now, the other side of the equation says, well, let me hold the club down here in my fingers like this. Now, the issues with a grip like this is you're going to see that there's a lot of cupping in my lead hand. And what this is going to do over the course of my backswing is going to create the conditions. If the cup remains, I'm going to have a flying trail arm. Less than beneficial. Also, we all know that we want to create a little bit of forward shaft lean through impact for power and also more strong impact position. There's going to be a lot of dynamic change in your golf swing. You set up with a lot of cupping in the wrist and expect you to get to a more bowed or flat position. And so a more optimal grip would be a spot kind of in between these two positions in the hand. We don't want to hold the club down here in the fingers. We also don't want to hold the club up here in between the palms of the hand. So I'd rather use kind of this base pad as a reference. I kind of want to nuzzle the grip right underneath against the heel pad of the hand. That way there's a little bit of space that's there, but not too much. This is going to create a perfect marriage by which we're going to have a little bit of a flatter lead wrist, kind of mimic the impact position a little bit more, whereby if I'm too much in the fingers, you're going to notice there's a lot of cupping action. So we want to hold the club just underneath the trail bottom part of the pad right there, at which point how much grip strength we have is again based on our posture. So if I had a lot of rounding, I'd see a stronger grip. If my shoulder is more neutral back into its socket, I'd see again a little bit more of a neutral position from here. And so at which point the way you bring your trail into the club, as we talked about a second ago, is by creating a little bit of the bump of the hip forward. So when it comes to placement in between the palms of the hand, I know that there's a lot of conversation in terms of, hey, where should the club be placed? And we all know that for as long as we are too much in between the heel pads of the hand, I can create very little power because I cannot set the club at the top of my swing. For as long as I'm holding the club down here in the fingers, it will create a lot of dynamic change to your wrist angles, which is less than beneficial. What we also see as a slight conversation in and of itself is if I hold the club down here in the fingers like this, as I make a golf swing, the club actually gets heavier because of centrifugal force. So there always will be a little bit more of an upright position and impact relative to where you were set up. So if I'm setting up, holding the club down here in the fingers like this, with a lot of what's called radial deviation, as the club gets heavier on the way down, I'm naturally going to see this flatten out a little bit more. By setting up with the club more against the bottom of the heel pad of the hand, that's going to stay a little bit more constant and create a more ease in terms of returning back to the same position by which you started. So the third thing we're going to talk about is grip pressure. Now, the most common thing that I heard growing up from my instructors is that you want to hold the club very lightly as if you're holding a baby bird. Now, the issue with this is that for the major championship winners I've worked with, I got them hooked up with grip pressure centers, basically said every single one of them were at between 8 and 9 out of 10 at impact. Every single one of them increased grip pressure on the way down. And the reason why has to do with the force this club applies back on my body when I make a golf swing. So if I make a golf swing at 100 miles an hour, this club is going to weigh heavier than what it did statically. And as this club gets heavier, my grip strength is going to have to increase so the club doesn't fly out of my hands. So when it comes to at impact, just know that it's okay if you feel the grip tighten up a little bit because it should based upon these forces. Now in setup, I would not want to hold the club very tightly as this would mitigate my ability to set the club at the top of the swing and reducing a lot of power I can generate. On the other side of the coin, I would not want to hold the club very loosely because then it's going to go ahead and kind of flail all over the place. So we do want to see kind of a middle grip pressure, kind of that 5 out of 10 in terms of grip pressure itself, but just know that it's okay if you feel that grip pressure itself increase on the way down because it's a result of natural forces. Now, just to recap these 3 ideas, the first one we talked about is how many knuckles should you see of your lead hand, and that again is based upon your posture. The way your arms hang, if your shoulders are back engaged, you would see 2 to 2.5 knuckles of your lead hand. Secondly, where in your hand should you place the golf club? We don't want to have the club in between the heel pads of the hand, at which point you'll not be able to set the club at the top of your swing, diminishing all of your power. We also don't want to see the club all the way down here in the fingers, as this creates a lot of dynamic change of wrist angles over the course of your golf swing as well. So we want to hold the club a little bit more underneath the heel pad of the hand. The way we get our trail hand to the club, because again, if I just throw my right hand on like this, my shoulders are pointing well left, this will create the conditions by which I would come over the top of my downswing. The way that we get our trail hand to the club is by incorporating an element called secondary tilt. That slight bump of my hip forward will allow me to get my right hand to the club in a way by which the V's of my lead hand as well as my trail hand are parallel to each other and also pointing more at my shoulder. Regarding grip pressure, we don't want to hold the club very tightly. We also want to hold the club very loosely. But just know it's okay if you feel the grip pressure increase on the way down, as it should, resulting from the natural forces in your golf swing. I know if you incorporate these 3 elements in your grip, overnight you're going to create more club head speed for power and distance off the tee, but also a bit more control for consistency and hitting more greens than you ever thought possible. I hope that made a little bit of sense, and if you like that video, click the thumbs up button below and click subscribe. That way you'll be notified every single time we upload another video lesson like this.